However reluctant he might have been to return to public service, Marshall could not long stay aloof. After the French Revolution, relations between France and the United States deteriorated. The excesses of the revolutionaries frightened even France's warmest United States friends, and the fears heightened when France began attacking American ships. John Adams, who was president at the time, sought desperately to avoid war with France and attempted to settle matters through peaceful means. Unsuccessful in the attempt, he asked John Marshall, Charles Cosworth Pinckney, and Albert Bury to go to France as envoys extraordinary and ministers plenipotentiary in an effort to smooth things over. Although inclined at first to reject the appointment, Marshall finally accepted. The three envoys would spend many frustrating, humiliating, and tiring months in France, ultimately becoming enmeshed in the infamous XYZ affair, in which the French tried to force the three Americans to pay a large bribe and to agree that the United States would make France a multi-million-dollar loan, all of which our envoys rejected out of hand. But war with France was averted, and, important to this discussion, Marshall, much to his own surprise, returned home a national hero. In gratitude, President Adams offered to appoint Marshall as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, but Marshall declined the appointment, believing, as many people believed at the time, that membership on the court was lacking in prestige. Instead, he returned to Richmond, determined to resume his law practice and a normal life with his family. Soon, however, he was approached to run for Congress. He refused, but George Washington was among those anxious to see Marshall run, and he summoned the reluctant candidate to Mount Vernon. For 3 days, Marshall resisted Washington's entreaty that he run for Congress. Marshall planned to rise early on the 4th day and leave Mount Vernon before Washington awoke. But when he stepped out on the portico, there stood his former commander-in-chief in full military regalia. Washington said he, too, had wanted to leave public service for good when he returned home after the war, but he responded to the public's call to duty to serve as the President of the United States. And it was Marshall's duty to make the same response to the call to run for Congress. Marshall finally yielded. He was elected, and he took his seat in the House of Representatives on December 1st, 1799. Marshall quickly became a leader in the House. One of his first speeches was described as a perfect model of argumentative eloquence, and one that deserved to be ranked among the most dignified display of human intellect. And it was Marshall who was chosen to announce to the full House that George Washington had died on December 14th, 1799. Shortly before Congress adjourned in May 1800, Marshall stopped by the War Department to inquire about a matter for a constituent. He detected a cooling in the Secretary of War, in the attitude of the Secretary of War, whom he considered a good friend. As he was leaving the office, Marshall asked the Secretary's clerk what was wrong. The clerk said, "Haven't you heard? President Adams has nominated you to replace the Secretary of War." Marshall asked Adams to withdraw the nomination, but the President refused, and the Senate confirmed Marshall on May 9th. Then, 3 days later, the Secretary of State resigned, and Adams nominated Marshall for that position. The Senate confirmed Marshall on May 13th. He accepted the appointment, and he took office at an annual salary of $3,500 with a staff of 9 persons, comprising the entire Department of State at the time. Marshall served as Secretary of State in the waning months of the Adams administration. During his tenure, he initiated a policy later to be enunciated in the Monroe Doctrine, telling foreign nations, "Don't bother us, and we won't bother you." Before leaving the presidency, following his defeat by Thomas Jefferson, President Adams took the opportunity to make one last important appointment. Oliver Ellsworth, who had been serving as Chief Justice of the United States, fell ill and resigned in December 1800. Adams offered the position to John Jay, who had been the first Chief Justice, but who had resigned to run for governor of New York, a position he thought was more prestigious than being the Chief Justice of the United States. When Jay refused reappointment to the court, Adams asked Marshall to recommend someone. Marshall said he had no suggestions other than one Adams had rejected previously. Adams then pointed at Marshall and says, "I believe I must nominate you." Adams made the nomination on January 20th, 1801. The Senate unanimously confirmed Marshall on January 27th, and he was sworn in as Chief Justice of the United States on February 4th. At Adams' request, however, Marshall continued to serve as Chief Justice, but as well as Secretary of State for 4 weeks, and then became Chief Justice full-time. Thus began a judicial career unsurpassed in American jurisprudence. At the time when John Marshall became Chief Justice, the Constitution, as I've indicated, did not enjoy the high level of respect it enjoys today. Indeed, one person described it as a frail and worthless fabric. Nor was the Supreme Court held in the high public esteem it enjoys today. Indeed, it was described by one observer as an object of derision, even contempt. Given this situation, what did John Marshall do? Well, he took a constitution with a dubious future, transformed it into an enduring charter of fundamental law, and adapted it to the various crises of human affairs. He took a court lacking in prestige and converted it into an equal partner in the tripartite arrangement that is so basic to our system of government. He took a federal judiciary that politicians had sought to make the subservient handmaiden of the other two branches of government, and gave it the freedom and independence that is so essential to its continued existence. All this Marshall accomplished with a deep sense of humility, an abiding air of modesty, and a noble character exceptional for its unpretentious simplicity. To these great attributes were added a superb intellect and a superior power of reasoning. Even more, Marshall was a prodigious worker, often turning out a greater number of opinions than all his associates combined. Without aid of legal precedent, but passionately motivated to see the new Constitution work and the information survive, Marshall became the expounder of the Constitution and the father of American constitutional law. With the facilities of his fertile mind and the clarity of his bold pen, in one major opinion after another, Marshall established the Constitution as the supreme law of the land and his court as the final arbiter of that law. Above all else, Marshall believed the judiciary should be free and independent. In a speech before the Virginia Constitutional Convention of 1829-1830, he said, "The judicial department comes in its effects to every man's fireside. It passes on his property, his reputation, his life, his all. Is it not to the last degree important that a judge should be rendered perfectly and completely independent, with nothing to control or influence him but God and his conscience?"